My sister took the pitch I'd been building for 2 years and handed it to our CEO as if she had written every word. She sat across from him, smiled, used my slides, and left with a promotion. I found out because the calendar invite for the meeting was still on my laptop. A meeting I'd been scheduling and cancelling for months, the one I had never been allowed to finish. She had sent a follow-up email that used the same phrasing I used in my notes. My name appeared nowhere. She told our parents it was a team effort. At work, she told the board it was her idea. The hurt was simple. It was the most important thing I had worked for. The thing that would have changed my career, and she took it like it was nothing. We are from the same small town in Ohio. Our parents still live in the split-level house on Maple Street, the one with the crooked mailbox and the hydrangeas that come back anyway. Claire, my sister, moved to New York 6 years before me. I stayed in Cincinnati until I paid off my student loans and saved for the move. When I finally left, I took a job at a mid-sized tech company in Manhattan. It was the kind of place where a single successful product pitch could change everything. Equity, title, the ability to escape the steady treadmill of middle management. For me, it meant a chance to stop juggling freelance work, to be able to pay for my mother's physical therapy without dipping into credit, to finally breathe. Claire and I had always been different. She is charismatic in a way I am not. She can be warm and then quick, sharp, and competitive. She married fast and kept her circle small. I married later, quietly, and I learned the details of software architecture and product roadmaps. For years, I thought our differences balanced us. When our father had the stroke 2 years ago, I moved in with my mother for 6 months to manage appointments, bills, and therapy schedules. I told Claire I couldn't come to New York for a while because I had to keep my job and keep the house payments current. I told her I would cover the calls and the seeing to if she could talk to Dad. She agreed. That split fell into everything that followed. At the company, I had been building the pitch in the evenings. I worked on a feature that would integrate a small business support tool into our main product. It was technically elegant, and it fit the market in a way our roadmap hadn't yet acknowledged. Over the course of 2 years, I rewrote prototypes, ran focus groups, argued with engineers, and quietly assembled a deck that balanced risk and revenue. I kept the work on my laptop and in encrypted folders because we had a fierce culture around IP. I told a few trusted colleagues. They told me to pitch it formally. I scheduled the pitch meeting for January 14th and then again for February 3rd because the board's calendar was congested. Each time it was postponed. Each time I kept refining. Claire called in the week of February 3rd and said she would be in town. She said she wanted to see me. I told her I had to work. The pitch was being moved again. She offered to take Dad to his therapy appointments. I said yes because he needed a ride and because the mortgage and my freelance taxes were due that week. And because there is a certain arithmetic to obligation, if you have 2 people who can give time and 1 who can give money, you take the latter and hope the former holds. I am not good at asking for help. I wanted this pitch to be my leverage, my proof that I was not only competent but necessary. The first escalation came quietly. There was an all hands on a rainy Tuesday. Someone in product mentioned the small business vertical in passing. A junior manager forwarded me a recording and asked, "Are you still on this?" It was a small thing. I answered with a few bullet points in the thread and attached a slide from my deck. The next day, Claire had an email addressed to the CEO. It read like my slide notes, only cleaner. With bullet points I recognized as mine. She had arranged a meeting for 3 days later. I looked at the clock and thought about my childlike optimism. I told myself someone would notice. I told myself the company had rules. I told myself nothing, actually. I sent a calendar to the CEO. She beat me to it. After that, things moved fast. Claire presented. The CEO listened. I watched through the conference room's glass wall while my level set met and nodded. When she finished, the CEO asked about prototypes and user testing. She named the exact analytics I had used. He smiled and asked that the team implement a pilot immediately. The CEO's reaction mattered because he had power. He had the authority to reassign headcounts and to allocate the small pool of product budget we all wanted. When I asked him afterward if I would be leading the pilot, he said the company needed someone to pull it together quickly and suggested Claire had the bandwidth. He assumed, without malice, I think, that bandwidth meant availability. Claire had found the opening I had been trying to make. My reaction was first a tight, practical thing. I told myself I could transfer the work. I asked to be on the implementation team. I forwarded the original files that bore my name, the dated commits with my email, the annotated slide deck. Claire's name did not appear anywhere on my files. I showed the CEO the file metadata. It read with my user account and timestamps. He squinted, then hesitated, then said he needed to think about the team's structure. I walked back to my desk and felt it in my chest. The slow cold of being seen and then unmade. The consequence was immediate. The pilot moved forward under Claire's management. I was assigned to supporting analytics, a role that reduced my visibility. The second escalation was more personal. At family dinners, Claire began to speak of my new role and to drop casual references to how lucky she was to move things along. She called our mother and said, I pushed it across the finish line. When I tried to mention specifics, the meetings, the code commits, Mum would change the subject to Dad or to something about dinner recipes. Claire had always been better at colouring in the spaces. She knew exactly what to say and when. At work, she began inviting the same people I had been collaborating with to informal coffees and to celebrate her wins. Invitations are small weapons. An invite excludes as much as it includes. People who had been my collaborators started bringing Claire their updates instead of me. Money shifted too. The pilot required additional contractors. Claire hired 2 outside consultants and told them she had a point of contact internally, the CEO. The contractors billed at a higher rate than our internal engineers. The budget for the pilot ballooned quickly. Budgets mean headcount and promotions early in a startup's life. When the legal department asked about IP authorship, Claire answered confidently, I led the ideation and the company accepted it because their documents reflected what had been presented to them. The legal hold on proprietary documents didn't protect me when the external narrative had already hardened. The consequence, the company's PR machine began drafting a case study, and my role shrank to a footnote in the pilot's planning doc. I tried to escalate formally. I spoke with HR. I asked to see the records of who had access to the deck, and I showed them email headers and commit logs. The HR representative nodded and said the company prefers to avoid he said, she said conflicts without incontrovertible evidence. I had evidence. It wasn't the kind that made people comfortable enough to act. The company culture had a kind of inertia in situations involving two employees with sibling ties. People didn't like deciding between family members. They preferred to keep the ship steady. The consequence, HR suggested mediation. I was offered a meeting with Claire in a quiet room, 2 HR people, and a manager. The company liked the image of fairness. At mediation, Claire was charming. She said we both wanted the best thing for the product. She suggested we share credit. She suggested we have a conversation about responsibilities moving forward. Her words were a velvet glove. She proposed that she remain the face for the pilot and that I be recognized internally for my contributions. Recognition, in this context, meant an email from the CEO and a line in the product notes. It meant nothing for equity or title. It meant acknowledgement without leverage. I left the room with the kind of hollow satisfaction someone gets when they avoid a fight by agreeing to a lesser wrong. The third escalation hit my life outside the office. Claire began to micromanage our father's care in a way that felt performative. She took over scheduling and then changed the locksmith company she used, then the physical therapist, and each vendor switch came with a story about efficiency and cost. She told our parents I was not prioritizing the family as much lately because I had ambitions. When I tried to argue that I was balancing nursing appointments with deadlines with mortgage payments, she would raise her voice just enough to make our mother look away. The consequence, Dad started to distrust my choices. He asked me with the fragile earnestness of someone losing context, "Are you sure you're choosing the right thing?" I had been confident about the pitch because it had been my anchor. When the anchor was taken, I had to answer that question aloud and felt the room tilt. At work, the pilot began to show some early metrics. Nothing extraordinary, but promising. Claire presented incremental results to the board and the press. They liked the spin. I sat through round after round of people clapping for the person who had owned the narrative. Each applause felt like a tally against me. I worked harder. I volunteered for late nights. I refined data models. I was efficient and quiet. Instead of changing anyone's perspective, it made me the kind of employee people assumed would be available indefinitely. The firm began bending the schedule to make Claire look decisive. She was promoted to Head of Small Business Initiatives in July. The promotion came with title, headcount, and a discretionary travel budget. I got a modest bonus for my work on analytics. The fourth escalation was humiliation. At a holiday party, a senior partner I had worked closely with asked me to tell the room about the pilot. I began to explain the user segmentation and the reason we prioritize certain features. Claire interrupted me with a grin. She told the room loudly that she had been guiding the work and then turned to the CEO and said, "Right?" The CEO laughed the polite laugh of someone who had already made a decision. The senior partner's face shifted from curiosity to polite disinterest. I felt heated and then oddly exhausted. I took a glass of water and left the room. I found a window ledge and let the noise of the party wash over me. The consequence? A few days later, a rumor circulated about my attitude toward team collaboration. When managers called for a check-in, they asked about soft skills. I had to defend the only thing left that wasn't taken, my professionalism. Weeks passed and the pressure mounted in ways I had not anticipated. My performance reviews began to read like a checklist, where my technical competence was never doubted, but my leadership potential was described as emerging. Claire's reviews praised her for strategic vision and leading cross-functional teams. The company had chosen a story to believe. Companies live on stories. The consequence: my path to promotion narrowed. The thing I had expected to use as leverage, the pilot, had been folded into a larger initiative, and my name had become perpendicular to the narrative. I tried to find leverage in numbers. I built a small spreadsheet that showed the origin of features and the commits tied to them. I annotated dates and times. I printed it and stapled the pages. Stapled paper feels conclusive in a way a folder on a laptop does not. I went to HR with those pages and asked to forward them to legal. There is a strange silence in institutional processes. Legal replied with a polite email that they would review documentation and that the company valued innovation while protecting IP. Their language was designed to flatten any urgency. It meant there would be time to reconsider things, but not necessarily in my favor. Meanwhile, Claire's jetting schedule increased. She began representing the company at conferences and in podcasts. She wore suits that fit and a practiced cadence when she spoke. People began to refer to her as the vision driver. When investors started asking for references about the small business initiative, the contact was Claire. Each investor call meant more profile, more credibility for her, and fewer doors for me. My personal finances narrowed. I was paying a mortgage on a small apartment in Queens, supporting my mother and making the student loan payments I had finally begun to feel comfortable with. The opportunity I had spent 2 years building into a pitch was supposed to be a vector for equity and a way to refinance our life. Without that, I cut expenses. I stopped going out. I took on a consulting contract with a nonprofit to make up the difference. There is a certain quiet shame in being forced to barter your time like that when you have worked more than 20 hours a week to keep things afloat at your day job. The consequence, exhaustion, became a constant companion, and I began to doubt my own memory of the moment I had first put the deck together. The low point arrived 6 months after the pilot launched. The company announced a public case study in which Claire was quoted at length about leading the initiative from inception. The press release included a screenshot of one of my annotated slides, but with my comments removed. I opened the release in my office and felt the world condense to a tiny, bright bead of pain. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wept quietly for the first time since Dad's stroke. I felt small and unseen in a way that had nothing to do with ego. My leverage had evaporated. My arguments about origin and authorship had become academic and easily drowned in PR. The emotional weight was not only professional, it was a breach of trust from my own sister. The night I hit the low point, I also received a legal letter. An outside contractor who had been hired by Claire's team to do UI work had mistakenly attached an email thread to an invoice. The attachment was a PDF of internal correspondence that included design notes and an early overview from M. Anders, my username. The thread had a clear line: me explaining the user need, a product manager asking for feasibility, and the contractor saying they would align with M. Anders on front end. It was, in its small way, exactly the incontrovertible evidence HR had said they needed. The contractor had sent the PDF to the wrong billing contact. It felt like a mistake the universe had made in my favor. I printed the thread and took it, trembling, to the CEO. He was in his office, a narrow room with a single plant and a skyline framed behind him. I knocked once. There is a tone to knocking on the CEO's door that makes you aware of your own position in the company. He looked up, and then the world narrowed to the expression on his face. For a moment, I thought he was going to be annoyed at the interruption. Instead, he reached for the document, read the header, and then his face changed. It was not a theatrical change. It was the small, precise falter of someone who misread a fact that had anchored a decision. His eyebrows rose, and his jaw slackened just a fraction. There was a flicker of something like recognition in his eyes, then a very quiet, private calculation. He didn't speak immediately. He set the papers down and looked at me, not with accusation, but with a kind of startled apology that is worse because it is unspoken. He said, "Show me everything." It was not dramatic. It was simply an invitation to fix an error. The shift was mechanical and precise. The CEO had the authority to change the story. His face told me he had just realized he had been steering under a false map. The turning point was a mistake, the contractor's wrong attachment. The mistake forced a reread of the record. It opened the door for me to present the commit history, the encrypted folders, the dated slides, and the email threads. The CEO called in legal and HR within days. He asked for a private meeting with me and Claire. There was no grand confrontation. Claire sat across from us, composed. Her hands were folded. She looked like someone who had always rehearsed for such a moment. The CEO did not shout. He asked Claire a question about authorship. Her answer was a careful, practiced ambiguity. She said, "We collaborated." He looked down at the contractor's file and then at me. For the first time during the entire ordeal, someone asked me to speak. I described the sequence of work, the dates, the commits, the midnight sessions with engineers. I showed the metadata and the forge logs. You could see the math change in the room. People are capable of compartmentalizing until presented with evidence they would have to deny publicly. Legal asked for timestamps and artifacts. The contractor's PDF sat on the table like a small, inconvenient truth. The CEO's face, when he looked at the commit history, was not triumphant. It was something quieter, the specific remorse of someone who had backed the wrong sibling without sufficient diligence. He said, "I'm sorry," in a small voice, which is, in a corporate setting, a kind of correction, not a confession. He admitted that he had allowed the narrative to harden. The consequences proceeded in a sober, bureaucratic way. The company announced an internal correction. They updated the pilot document to list me as the product lead and Claire as a cross-functional coordinator. The correction was not a headline. It was a line in a product note and a careful email to the board. Claire was given the option to stay in her role or move to a different team. She chose to stay, but take a lateral shift into a role focused on partnerships. The board, wary of family drama, preferred to mitigate public anger. Investors were notified privately of the authorship clarification. HR and legal arranged for a small equity adjustment and a formal letter recognizing authorship. I was offered the title of Product Manager, Small Business Initiatives, with a modest equity grant reflecting my contribution. It felt like the right thing under imperfect circumstances. It was not revenge, it was correction with constraints. Claire's face when the CEO gently told her the company was updating credits had a set of features I hadn't seen before. Anger, followed by the slow resignation of someone who had miscalculated her own footing. She left the room and then, later that week, flew home to Ohio for family matters. At parents' house, she told Mum she had made a mistake and that she'd talk things through. Politics at the family kitchen table became another battlefield. Parents are often the last place people expect to be blamed. When Claire returned, she avoided me for a month. She sent text messages that began with, "Hope you're well," and ended with, "We should talk." I answered minimally because the work had left me raw. The company's response also meant new dynamics at the office. People who had been friendly with Claire but had never worked closely with me began to show interest in my work. The junior manager who had recorded the initial all hands stopped by my desk more often. The senior partner who had interrupted me at the party apologized quietly and asked if I would lead a segment at the next investor presentation. I said yes. That felt like a small physical victory. I did not relish Claire's discomfort. I resented the months of erosion that had happened before. Yet what I felt most was relief at being seen again. Family consequences were trickier. Our parents called and said they were proud of both of us and that the family had enough to worry about without adding career drama. In their letters, there was equal measure of relief and avoidance. They didn't want to fight. I pressed my mother once on the phone and asked why she had not believed me when I told her the pitch was mine. She paused and said, "Your sister has always been able to get a room to notice her." There is a kind of honesty in that. The truth was simple. The people who make the loudest case sometimes win the immediate vote. Claire and I had a conversation in late autumn. It was brief. We met at a neutral cafe near the river. She apologized in the manner of someone who had been cornered by facts and felt truth heavy. I accepted the apology because the alternative felt like carrying a weight I no longer needed. There was no dramatic rupture. There was no reconciliation song. She said, I was afraid you'd never leave home and I'd be the one who had to push. She said it in an offhand way as if exposure explained everything. I remembered our father's face the last time he spoke clearly when he had said, "Do what you can, but do not hurt each other." That sentence echoes differently when you're older. The realistic outcomes were uneven. I got the title and a modest equity adjustment. I did not receive back pay for the months when the narrative had reduced my leverage. Claire kept her job. Though her role shifted, she did not get fired. Our parents did not take sides publicly. There were slow, awkward family gatherings for months. Our relationship was never the same. She came to my birthday once last year and left early. We talk on the phone twice a month at most. I stopped going to the town's summer fair. I found that the small rituals you drop matter less than the internal space you reclaim. There was one final bureaucratic consequence. When investors requested the origin documents during the next funding round, the company provided the full thread, including the contractor's missent PDF and the Git logs with my username. The board formally amended the product case study. It became a small data point in the company's history, a correction recorded and then forgotten by most. For me, it meant something practical. The equity adjustment allowed me to refinance my apartment and finally hire a part-time caregiver for my mother, so I no longer had to juggle both at once. Those were the consequential quiet wins that mattered more than any public statement. The emotional satisfaction was not cinematic. I did not gloat. I did not parade my victory. The CEO's face, The day he first read the contractor's PDF has stayed with me. It was not the face of a villain dramatically unmasked. It was the face of someone who had made an error of attention and was trying to correct it without making a spectacle. That expression taught me something about how power can be accidental. Power is not always a malice. Sometimes it's the slow accumulation of choices that favor the louder voice. My relief was not because Claire was punished. It was because the record was realigned with the truth. That mattered because it gave me leverage to do what I had originally planned. Lead the pilot in a way that allowed the product to serve small businesses genuinely. We are still complicated. I still check in on our father. Claire and I do not swap the casual things we used to. Sometimes I find her notes in the family group chat and they are full of the neat charisma she always had. Sometimes she sends photos of Dad in physical therapy with captions about progress. I respond with short support. I have built a new boundary around my work and my life. When someone asks me if I harbored bitterness, I say I did for a while. Bitterness is heavy and unproductive. I let it exist long enough to honor how I felt, and then I reoriented. The end result is that I accepted the promotion and stayed at the company for another 18 months. The pilot became a product line. Investors liked the numbers. I was offered a role at another firm last spring, a higher title and more money, but with more travel. I said no because I wanted to be present for my mother. The decision wasn't noble. It was an arithmetic one. I could do the work I wanted where I was and keep my voice for the people I loved. I tell you that not to moralize, but because the restitution matters when it changes the calculation of your life. If there is anything I want you to take from what I have told you, it's the small mechanics of how these things happen. Someone can stand in front of the room and take credit if the rest of the room lets them. The people who set the story matter. Evidence matters. Commit logs, email headers, contractor attachments. These are the tools of truth in a world that prefers headlines. And if you're someone who has been sidelined, collect your work, label your files, keep copies. It sounds dry and practical because it is. It saved me. I'm not trying to make you choose sides between me and my sister. Our story is messy and human. I have kept working. I have bought a smaller house with a yard where my mother can garden and where I can sleep at night without the same tautness in my chest. Claire has found other projects. Sometimes we are civil, sometimes we are not. We both live with the choices we made. If you like this, please leave a like. If you want more stories like this, consider subscribing. Have you ever had someone take credit for your work? Tell me in the comments. I'd like to hear how you handled it.